We're recording the interview of Kim Johnson. This interview is being recorded by Ericka Carter from the Wright State University Veterans Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University in the New Media Incubator. It is 3:42 p.m. on November 22nd, 2019. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Wonderful. I really appreciate you coming out and doing this interview with me.
Glad that I could come out and help you now that I found out about your program.
Awesomeness. When and where were you born?
I was born May 5th, 1949 in Pineville, Louisiana.
Really? Pineville?
Mm-hmm.
My first husband, I think, was born there or some small city around there. But I think it was Pineville.
I'll tell you a story about that.
Okay, tell me a story.
I have a good friend, a retired Chief Master Sergeant, Marie Ashmore, and we had worked together at the Pentagon on the Joint Pentagon Enlisted Advisory Council. We had worked several years on the Chiefs' balls, Chiefs' inductions and things, and never really talked about where we were from or anything. But one of the meetings, she had said something about we were planning the next 2 or 3 weeks for training for the ball or something like. And she said, "Well, I'm not going to be here next week because I'm going on vacation." And I said, "Oh, any place fun?" And she said, "No, we're just going to go back home." And I said, "Where's home?" She says, "Louisiana." And I said, "Where in Louisiana?" She says, "Well, you wouldn't know if I told you." And I said, "Well, why don't you try me?" And she says, "Pineville." And I said, "You're kidding." And she says, "No." So come to find out, we had known each other for probably 12, 15 years. Found out that we grew up 50 miles apart. It was like, oh, geez, you know, it's, but we just thought, we know each other, but you think you know a lot about the people and everything, and then you find things, little things like this.
So had her last name changed, and that's why you didn't recognize her? Or?
No, I didn't know her because I actually grew up 50 miles north of there in a little town, a little Wheeling, a little community. So it wasn't that I knew her, you know, at that time. It's just learning that she was born in the same city that I was, and knowing her for as long as I did, and did not know any of this information about her.
Wow.
So
that is pretty interesting. Okay, so where were your parents born, and what were their occupations? Their names?
My dad was John Harbor Taylor, and my mom, and he grew up in Texas. My mom was Laura Lee Matthews, and she grew up in the little town, little Wheeling community where I was born, or where I grew up after being born in Pineville. And my mom and dad, my mom had a 6th grade education, my dad had a 4th grade education, so I grew up, I kid a lot about it, but I say I grew up on the other side of the tracks. We were a welfare family from the time I was born to the time that I left home when I was 16 years of age, and that's all I knew.
I love the name Laura Lee.
Yeah.
That's such a pretty name. So did your parents work at all, or? My
dad had worked in logging in Texas, and he had a bad injury on his leg when he was probably in his mid-20s or so, and it broke his leg. And of course, back in those days, when you're poor and you know you're lucky you have any type of bandage to help, but he didn't get any of that care, so he was crippled pretty much for his life. So.
Okay. Did you have any siblings?
I did. I had 4 brothers, 4 sisters. We were a big family, and now I have 2 sisters still living, and I have 2 brothers still living, but the rest of them I lost 1 brother in a car accident, and then I lost 2 brothers at the same time in another car accident, so.
I'm so sorry to hear that. Huh. That is just terrible. Did anyone else join the military?
My sister did. After I joined, it was about 3 years later, and she saw how much I liked it, but we were so different personalities. And once she got there, if she wasn't, she was a very good basketball player, very good volleyball player, and she was able to travel. She got selected on the Air Force basketball team, and if she wasn't traveling, she was not happy. It was just one of those things. But I loved it from day one. Wouldn't trade it for anything. But with her, she hated it because she wanted to be on the basketball court the entire time, and gave up a wonderful singing career because she was going to go in the Air Force and going to do this and going to do that and everything, but it didn't work out, and so.
Okay. You left home at 16.
Yeah, I did.
Was that to join the Air Force?
No, I knew that I wanted to be more and do more than keep the thing going with welfare and everything. And Ruth and I, we have similar things. I used to go to the library, and when you're a welfare family, everybody knows what's better for you than anybody else, better than you do. And I would go to the library and I'd read books and I'd say, I'm going to go there somewhere. Yeah, right, you're going to be 15 and pregnant and probably have 2 kids or 3 kids by then. No, I'm not. So I participated in any programs in school that I knew could possibly help me down the road. I had a 6th grade history teacher and a 7th grade science English teacher. And I got involved in 4-H, and my county agent, my parish, Louisiana, we were parishes. In my parish, my 4-H agent kind of took me under her wings and made sure that I had the things that I needed for the 4-H projects to enter in the parish, enter in the city, in the regions, and enter in the states. And from the 9th grade on, when I entered any type of project, I took first place, no matter whether I was regional, parish, or state, and went to LSU and different schools for what they call 4-week short courses. And I knew those things would help me get ahead and move out. I played basketball, I ran track, and was involved in FHA, and anything that would help me, know that it would help me. And so when there were some things that happened in my life with my family after my dad passed away, and my mom started dating someone else, and I knew that I did not want to live in the house. And when she told me they were getting married, I said that I'm leaving. So I contacted my aunt in Michigan, and when she told me I could live with her. So I went to Michigan and graduated my last year of high school at Waverly High School, and was working. I had enough credits by the time that I got there. I didn't need anything else to graduate, except that Michigan had a requirement. You had to take Michigan history in order to graduate from high school. So because I was already on campus, I had to take 2 additional classes to get me through the time frame. So I took business classes, and then I had to take PE because I was on campus again. So I graduated, and I was working. I would go to school in the morning, and my counselor helped me get into a program where I was working with Michigan Bell Telephone 4 hours a afternoon, 5 days a week. So I go to school in the morning and go to the Michigan Bell as an operator there with them. I graduated high school. I started taking college classes and at the community college there, and because my family couldn't help me, and I knew I had to be, do it all on my own. My aunt and uncle made sure I got to class. They would take me to classes and pick me up whatever I needed to do, but that was what got me through. So then I happened to be at Michigan State on campus, and joint recruiting was taking place. So I said, that looks pretty good. That will help me get a lot of places. And so I went and talked to, I was going to join the Navy. Then when they told me that I needed to know how to swim, after two of my brothers their death was caused by drowning, I couldn't put my head underwater, so I said, this won't work. So I went next door to the Air Force recruiter, and I said, what can you do for me? And he said, when do you want to leave? And March 1968, I joined the Air Force. Never regretted one day of it.
Okay. Did you finish your classes?
I did.
You okay?
Yes. Let's see, I went to earn 4 associate degrees, four, and an undergraduate degree and a master's degree. Yeah, all through tuition.
Before you joined the?
No, after I joined the Air Force, but I was going to classes at the time that I went into the recruiting office.
Did you get an undergrad? Did you get like an AA before you left, or you just had some classes?
No, I had 2 semesters of classes.
Okay.
Yeah, before I went in.
Okay. And did you have any tuition assistance prior to that, or were you
No
school loans?
No, I paid for it as I went.
Oh.
Yeah, I kept my job with Michigan Bell Telephone, and I did waitressing on weekends. And I paid as I went. But at that time, back then, it wasn't as expensive as it is now to do it. But
it was possible.
Exactly. But once I got into the Air Force, they said, well, you can't take classes, off-duty classes, until you have your 5 level. I said, okay, I can wait. I can do that.
Okay. So you head off to basic training?
From Michigan, from Lansing, Michigan, where I was living with my aunt and uncle. Mm-hmm.
And where was basic?
Basic was San Antonio, Texas. At that time, it was 6 weeks of basic training. And because I had taken business classes, normally you go to your tech school after basic training, excuse me, but because I had business classes in high school, I'd finished a full year, I went what we would call DDA, direct duty assignment, to Cape Cod, Otis Air Force Base, and was my first duty assignment there in the administrative career field. And couldn't have been better treated. I had a caring supervisor. I had an individual who was a radar technician. He went through the entire administrative technical training so that he could be my instructor and trainer to get me up. And so what should have taken 18 months, I did it in 10 months with the highest score ever achieved by anybody in the admin career field at Otis Air Force Base. So I always say he was my great supervisor. He would always say, what do you think you want to do? What do you think? I said, I want to travel. He said, well, you need to go down to personnel and you need to put in for worldwide duty. So I did. I literally listened to everything he said. I said, if he cared enough to learn my technical training, then I can do all this that I want to do, because he encouraged me, So I went down and applied for worldwide duty, and they said, you can't go anywhere because you're not a buck sergeant, you're not 21, you don't have 3 years in the Air Force. I said, okay, when can I apply? So 3 months later, I went back down to personnel. And so, well, you can do this and you can do that. If you have a waiver, you can request a waiver. I requested a waiver. 2 months later, I had orders to Vietnam. And so at that time, it was like, well, no, you can't go overseas. You're not a buck sergeant, you're not 21, you don't have 3 years in the Air Force. And I said, okay, then why did I get the orders? Well, it was a mistake. So about 2 weeks later, I get these same orders again. They call me up and they said, you can go if you request a waiver on all 3 accounts. And I said, why should I need to request a waiver if you're the people that's giving me the orders? Well, he said, do you really want to go? I mean, yeah. I said, yes, I did not come into the Air Force to sit and do nothing, and I want to travel. So I went to Vietnam, September '69.
Whoa.
Yes. This little cotton picking girl from the other side of the tracks.
You picked cotton too?
I did. Our way for my family to have extra money during school year was to pick peas. And my cousin had a lot of people that he hired to work at his farms, belled hay, pick cotton, pull watermelons, pick beans. You know, we did it.
My mom picked potatoes.
Yeah.
In potato fields, and my cousins pulled watermelons.
Mm-hmm. My cousin would sell them to my dad for 25 cents a piece, and my dad would take, and he had a little delivery route that he took, you know, and they were always looking for the watermelons to 75 cents. So he'd make 50 cents or maybe $1 on each one of them.
My cousins would bring them home, and there'd be a line of them in the garage, and I get to eat a whole watermelon. I was about 9.
I would do that too. I would just bust it right there.
I eat a whole watermelon by myself. Yeah.
Yep.
Those were the days.
Yes.
Those were the days. Okay, so let's go back. You are in the military for a year.
Mm-hmm.
You've been in for a year.
Mm-hmm.
You get orders from Vietnam, Vietnam.
Right.
When it's hot.
Right.
It's hot down there.
It's real hot.
And I don't mean physically.
I was at McVie headquarters, Saigon. Outside of Saigon, the headquarters was there by Tan Son Nhut Air Base.
How many other women are there?
I don't know what the numbers are, because we had a lot of nurses that were out with the 193rd group, and they were out in the field, up field and so forth. In McVie headquarters alone, we only had 3 Air Force women and 4 Air Force women, I'm sorry, and probably 10 Army.
10?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. But the number of nurses, I couldn't tell you. I know that right now there is approximately 1,900 or so that are still living. And I have a good friend that I was stationed with over there, Claire Stearns. I don't know if you've heard that name. She wrote the book. We all helped her with it, but she primarily got it produced and things. Women in Vietnam, the Vietnam Women's Association, and we have reunions every 3 to 4 years. And I think the last number was around 1,900 that are still living.
Wow.
So
please tell me more about Vietnam and your experience. You got off a plane or a boat?
Plane. After a 20-something hour flight, and the first thing that I'm hit with is mosquitoes. And I'm saying, I think this was a big mistake. I'm not sure if this is what is going to be good for what I looked for or what I was wanting to do. And I was scheduled to work in J3, which is personnel at the McVie headquarters. So I'm there, and I'd been there for probably 2, maybe 3 weeks. And I'm sitting at my desk one day, and the door burst open, and this big, you say it's one of the biggest men I've ever seen. This big, tall Marine colonel comes walking in, and he looks at me. And now, just let you fill you in on this. My birth name was Bertha May Taylor. Okay, and he walks in and he says, "Are you Airman Taylor?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I am." And I immediately stood up and waited for him to, what's he doing down here? Well, the second or third night I was in Vietnam, I met a Spec 4 in the Army, and she invited me out to dinner in downtown Saigon. I didn't know my curfew was 10 o'clock. She didn't tell me the curfew was 10 o'clock. She didn't tell me we were supposed to be, get involved with civilians or anything like that. But anyway, we went downtown, and we did not get back to the hotel in time for our curfew. So I thought that he was coming after me for that. I really did, because I found out later he was Secretary of Joint Staff for the headquarters. And I said, and I stood up and I said, "Yes, sir, I am." And he said, "General Vanderhay would like for you to come up and speak with him." So he was the Air Force 2-star Deputy Chief of Staff for MACV headquarters. And I thought, I'm really in trouble now because of this incident. I'm not even in the country for a week. And so I went up and I asked him, I said, "Well, when does he want to see me?" He says, "I'm here to escort you up." Okay, so I followed him upstairs, and we walk into the outer office of the general's office, and he's asking me a couple of things. When did I get in country, and how did I like it so far? Did I think it was going to be a good assignment? And I'm here only 3 or 4 days. How am I supposed to know? It's going to be waiting really on what's going to happen in here from the general. So the general comes in, and he's a very short gentleman, and he smiles, and he says, come on in. And I thought, okay, well, maybe it's not so bad after all. Well, what had happened 6 weeks before I got in country, his receptionist, admin assistant, had been hit by a truck going home from the headquarters to the complex where he lived, and it broke his back and a couple legs, and both his legs and everything. And the general was looking for a replacement for this tech sergeant. And I already had been briefed on, the Air Force women who were there and who to watch out for and who not to. So when the general told me this, what had happened, and he, excuse me, and he indicated that he would like for me to come up and be his administrative assistant. And of course, I'm there. I got 2 stripes. The highest individual I'd worked for was a full colonel, and I wasn't sure. But then I said, obviously, he's looked at my record, and I guess so far I've done okay for a year in the Air Force. And I told him my concerns, was the rank. I said, well, I understand there's a master sergeant. Why would you not want her with her rank and time in the military? He said, I don't want a master sergeant. He said, would you give me 90 days? And I said, well, yes, sir, if you feel like that I could do the job or something similar to that. But, and he says, okay, give me 90 days. And he said, at the end of 90 days, if you want to go back down to J3, he said, I'll take care of it. I'll arrange for it. I probably was never chewed out so much upside and one down the other one as I was in that 3 months. But at the end of 3 months, he called me in one day. He came back from lunch, and he said, well, your 3 months is up. He said, are you ready to desert me? And I looked at him, and I said, no, sir, I'm not. He says, good. He says, I'm calling 7th Air Force, and you're going to be assigned permanently to me. The following year, he promoted me to buck sergeant on my birthday when I turned 21. So, And he was my mentor throughout my career in the Air Force. I knew what my line number was probably 2 to 3 weeks before promotions came out. He was constantly mentoring me from the standpoint. He wanted me to apply for commission, and I said, I just don't think I want to do that. He said, okay, this is what I want you to do then. He said, if you want to be a chief, he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to stay in the Air Force, make it a career, and I'm going to be a Chief Master Sergeant. He said, okay, do not lay your professional military education books down until you have a line number. I literally took him at his word. My assignments from then on, even when I was on the Air Force One crew, my books went with me everywhere. The crew would laugh at me. They say, hey, let's go to dinner, let's have a drink. I'm not a drinker. I'd study and get a lot of rash from it, but that's okay. I made a chief. So, and he would always touch base. He passed away 2 years ago at 97, 2-star general. I became the daughter he never had. My children became the grandchildren, his grandchildren. So we lost Mama Jean 10 years ago. But he's the best thing that ever happened to me in my career. And he would say to me, he knew my background, he would say to me, forget where you came from your life standpoint. Never forget that you wore one stripe or no stripes at one point. Always take care of your people. But he was always there to lend encouragement at every step of my life.
Okay. You went from 2 stripes, which is what rank?
Airman first.
To a buck sergeant, which is what rank?
E3, E4.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's very doable and possible in a war zone.
Oh, it is. You don't lose your promotion time and grade or anything like that just because you're in a war zone or you're deployed or anything like that.
Okay.
I actually made staff sergeant in 38 months in the Air Force, which was almost unheard of, because at the time that I made staff sergeant in 38 months, there were people retiring from the Air Force as a buck sergeant, E4, E5, 20 years.
So staff sergeant is E6?
Staff sergeant in the Army is an E6. Staff sergeant in the Air Force is an E5.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just for clarification.
Right.
All right. Well, congrats.
Thank you.
That is doing something. Extra special.
I was always encouraged to work hard and always give, not 100%, but 1,000%.
Did that cut into your social?
No.
No.
I did not really have a social life when I was growing up, and I didn't feel like that I needed a social life when I came into the military because I was studying. This same general, he says to me, he came out one day and he said, I think that you need to start taking your classes, because this is when he started pushing me to work toward getting a commission. So he would go home. He lived over in the compound where all the general officers. He would go home. He had a car and driver, and the driver would drop him off. He would come back and pick me up, take me to 7th Air Force near lunch hour. I took classes 5 days a week. And when my class was over, he would bring me back to the headquarters. Then he'd go pick up the general and bring him back. And that was 23 months. I actually went over for a year. The tours over there were for a year, and mine was for a year. However, he came back to the office one day, and I knew he had a meeting with General Creighton Abrams. I don't know if you know that name, the 4-star. And I said, well, how'd your meeting go, sir? And he said, just fine. He asked me to stay. You see, we were in the middle. This is when the drawdown that were starting to happen. And he asked me to stay and see it through. And I said, well, what's Mrs. Van going to say? I mean, just kind of like this. He said, Mrs. Van will support me in anything that I do in my career. He said, I told the general that I would give him my answer after I got an answer from you. Now, the relationship that we had was I could pretty much say anything to him. And I just went, 2 stripes, 2 stars. And I looked up at him. He said, no, don't look at it that way. He said, if you really want to stay, I would love to. But if you really want to go home, then I'll support it. He said, you think about it. And by this time, I had gotten married. I met my first husband in Vietnam, who was an aide to General Creighton Abrams.
Oh, say that again.
When I had married, my first husband was the aide to General Creighton Abrams.
Oh, an aide.
An aide, right,
Oh, okay.
right.
Okay.
Yeah. So he said, you and your husband discuss it and let me know what you want to do.
You got married in Vietnam?
I got married at Travis Air Force Base. When we decided to get married, and we did the extension. When you were over there for a year and you extended for 6 months or more, you got a free 30-day vacation, no accounts against you, and paid transportation anywhere in the world that you wanted to go. So we wanted to come back home because I hadn't met any of his family. He hadn't met any of my family. So we came home. Before we came home, we made contact at Travis Air Force Base with the chaplain's office, and told him what we wanted to do. And we had to go through chaplain counseling for 6 weeks over in Vietnam and have proof that we did that. And so we landed at Travis one day, got married the next, and flew to Tennessee the next. So.
And your family liked him, I hope?
Yes, they did, yes.
And his family liked you?
Yes, they did.
Okay. And then vacation was over?
Vacation was over. We went back to Vietnam, and we finished up all the packages that needed to be done for the drawdown to start, and planning and programming and everything. And let's see, the general went home in the 1st of March, and we came back home in the middle of March of 71.
Okay. So, what's home at that point?
Coming back from Vietnam, Colorado. My husband got an assignment to Fort Carson, and I had a joint spouse to 14th Aerospace Force at Air Force Base, Colorado Springs.
How'd you like that?
I loved it. I always said it was 14 months too short. You could not look out the window any 2 days in a row and see the same scenery, because you were looking at the mountains, the clouds dropping. It was just unbelievable. We rode motorcycles, and every weekend we'd be on the motorcycle somewhere, and out in Aspen or down in Pueblo, Royal Gorge. It was just absolutely gorgeous. That's, to me, one of probably the most beautiful states that we have in the United States, scenery-wise, anything.
When you returned from Vietnam, what was your reception like from civilians?
We didn't have a lot of association with our neighbors, because my husband worked shift work, and I had straight days. I worked straight days. So when he was off work and I was off work, we were usually not at home. We didn't spend a lot of time at home because it was just the two of us. We both had motorcycles, and we were out traveling the country somewhere.
Okay.
But we had only been there probably 10 months, and General Creighton Abrams died on active duty. Well, no, I'm sorry, let me back up. My husband's boss in Vietnam, General Abrams was named Chief of Staff of the Army, and we get this phone call from General Livesey, Colonel Livesey at the time, who was his military aide, call and tell him that my husband, that the general wanted him to work for him in Washington, D.C. So, of course, here comes the roundabout for the joint spouse, working the joint spouse for me and everything. So that's when we moved to Washington the first time. They said to him, don't worry about it, we'll take care of all the arrangements. We'll get with the Air Force and get the joint spouse assignment orders taken care of. And here we were, Washington, D.C. for the first time.
And that was 72?
72, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. How'd you like Washington, D.C.?
I loved it.
Okay.
Without the traffic.
I'll stop asking you that question.
Without the traffic. Honestly, I would not go back and change my career in the Air Force for anything. And if you said to me today, I need you to come back on active duty, I said, where do you want me to sign? Where do you want me to take the oath? I loved it. And it did. I was very blessed with my friends, with my career, with my supervisors. I had one bad supervisor my entire, honest to God truth, one bad supervisor during my entire Air Force career.
How did you deal with that?
Well, I was a little bit afraid at first because my first husband and I had separated, and he came in and he was a military aide to the SACEUR, and he felt my duty extended. He was separated from his family, his wife. He felt my military duties extended over too. I told him what he could do, and I walked out. So I had kept my commander, my squadron commander, informed of how he was treating me, the things he was saying to me and everything. And my commander said, well, just make sure that you provide me with the comments and his actions towards you. And I did. Well, it came time for my performance report. At that time, it went from up to 9, the Air Force rating system, okay? I had 9s from the time that I came into the military. He gave me a 4 and a 5, 4s and 5s. And so he took it down to my unit. Well, my commander called me and he said, by the regulations, because of the way that he rated you, I have to meet with you and him at the same time, and he has to present you with this performance report. And I said, okay, just tell me when. So we ended up doing that. Well, when we were in the meeting, he handed me the report. I looked at it, I wadded it up in my hand, and I handed it back, and I said, you know what you can do with this report. And again, my commander completely supported me, and he said to the major at the time, he said, I've known Sergeant Broyles since she got here. I cannot believe any of these things that are written. He said, and I'm going to tell you up front, I will be going to General Scythe, who was a 4-star General Air Force, Chief of Staff at SHAPE headquarters. And he took it there, and General Scythe upgraded it to a 9 and put promote on it, because he saw me every day. He knew what I did every day. So I moved on. I can't let back here hold me back and feel sorry and everything. I moved on. And I'm sitting at my phone one day, and it rings, and it's the commander of the Air Force One. And I had served one tour before when we went to Belgium on a joint spouse, and he says, the president's flying a lot more than he used to, and we're in a second position, and I want you to come back. I said, when do you want me to be here? I have orders already. We're leaving in 2 months to go back home, and I have orders to Langley Air Force Base. He said, all you have to do is tell me you do or do not want to go. And he said, we'll take care of it. I called him and I said, I'm ready to go back. So they took care of it. I never looked back at this person because my commander and General Scythe had both told me, because what I was going to do is ask for this report to be removed from my records. And the general looked at me, he said, we all know who you are, and it would look worse if you had it pulled, because the board, when you're getting up in your senior grades, if you're staying in, he said they'd be wondering, why is there a blank in this period of time? So I said, okay, I'll trust you. I left it like that.
Okay. We kind of missed something when I asked you to start talking about your bad supervisor situation from when you went to D.C. with your husband.
I went to join spouse, and I was scheduled to go with the 11th Wing at Bowling Air Force Base, and my administrative unit was at the Pentagon, so I had gone to the Pentagon to sign in for my unit, do the administrative paperwork and everything. And Charlotte, one of the girls that I knew in Vietnam, worked just down the hall from me. She was working as the receptionist administrative assistant to General Jeannie Holm, who was the director of women in the Air Force. Okay, so I stopped by to say hello to her, never thinking that, what was going to happen. But let me just back up. When I was in Vietnam, General Holm, who had worked with my boss in Europe, she came to Vietnam for a visit, to visit the women, the officers and enlisted people there. And I was selected as one of her, I was selected as her enlisted assistant while she was there, chaperone, making sure that she had what she needed and everything. When she got ready to leave, after 3 days, she was shaking our hand, and she said, if you ever get to Washington, please come by and say hello. So, a little bit of skepticism, I guess. She said, yeah, right, I'm going to go and interrupt the two-star general just to say hello. So I walk in to see Charlotte to say hello to her, and she says, do you want to say hi to the general? And I said, no, that's okay. I don't want to bother. No, she'll be really upset if you don't. She said, hold on for a minute. So she gets on the phone and tells the general that I'm out here. The general comes walking out, shakes my hand. I remember you. You worked with Van in Vietnam. And I said, yes, ma'am, I did. She says, well, what are you going to be doing? What are you here to be assigned? And I said, yes, ma'am, I have orders to go to the 11th Wing at Bowling Air Force Base. And she said, what are you going to be doing? And I said, the title is receptionist. She looks at me and she says, you're a staff sergeant? No, you're not serving coffee to some 06s. Hold on for a minute. Next thing I know, she goes into her office, and I hear her on the phone, and then she comes out and she says, can you meet with General Bonatti at 10 o'clock on Monday? I have no idea who she's talking about, what it's all about or anything. And I said, yes, ma'am. And she tells Charlotte, she says, let them know that we'll work on getting her administrative papers taken care of. So I go to this meeting, General Bonatti, he is interviewing for the Dakowitz Committee. Are you familiar with them? The Defense Advisory Committee on Women in the Services. And at that time, there were 50 prominent civilian women who had made it good in government, education, corporate world. They were selected for a 3-year, they'd serve on a 3-year board. And they had, each year, they would have an Air Force enlisted, all the 4 services enlisted an officer representing there, and we would attend these meetings with these women who were making, taking ideas to the Secretary of Defense for how we could improve women's positions and so forth in the military, all the branches. And so all the services were represented by an officer and enlisted every year. And I'm coming up on my year to be finished up, and I get a call from the general's office for me to come up, and she wanted to see me. And so I go up, and I don't know what she wants to see me about, or everything. But anyway, she says, your time is coming up, and she says, I'm going to nominate you for a White House job. So she explains a little bit about it to me, with clearances and what I'd be doing flying on the Air Force One crew. And I said, well, I don't know. I was very upfront because I was concerned about, when she told me I'd have to have a high level clearance, and say, I don't know if I can get a clearance. And I explained to her what had happened when I was growing up and everything. And so she says, well, let's let your record speak for itself, and we'll go from there. I went through the interview process. I got selected as the Air Force enlisted representative for that year. And then when I went for the interview with General Bonatti, for the Air Force One job, I had to go to the White House military office. And at that time they would say it had to be an Air Force position, it had to be a staff sergeant, it had to be a female. They could say it was a male or a female. These days you can't do that. So I went through, and she had nominated me from the headquarters command. Each command got to nominate one female. And then we started, at that time we had 13 commands. And so the first round of interviews, they put it down to 5. The second round of interviews, they put it down to 3. And then I didn't hear anything for over a month, and I figured somebody else got the job. Next thing I know, I'm getting a call, congratulations. You start out with the Air Force One crew in June. So that was June '73.
How did your husband feel about this?
My husband, I was still with my first husband at the time, and he didn't really care. He had a high-level position already, and we talked about it, and he said, well, there's going to be a lot of travel, and you want to start a family, and on and on and on. And I said, we'll work it out. And we did, but we had been separated a couple times before, and he was into alcohol and stuff, and I'd always said that would never be a part of my family because I grew up with that, and nothing. So when he put my family, after I had a son, he put alcohol above my family, then it ended. So.
Was that after Air Force One?
That was after
the first time on Air Force One?
The second time.
Okay.
It's because I was always of the belief you get married once and you work at it and you make it work. Well, some things can't work. So when we were in Belgium, we were separated a couple times there. And then I was getting ready to go up for a tech sergeant, and I knew I had to get the NCO Academy out of the way. And so my unit got orders for me to come back to the States to attend the NCO Academy at Bolling Air Force Base in D.C. And so I brought our son back, and he stayed with his grandparents, my husband's parents, and they absolutely loved it because he could have taken care of him, but he had such crazy hours, and trying to get a babysitter at the hours that he worked shift work as over there, and so when we came back from Belgium, it's like we tried, and just. I'd come home and his buddies would be there with the drink, and I didn't want any of that. I didn't want my son involved in it. So.
Okay. So can you tell me about your job on Air Force One? What did you do?
My title when I was on the airplane was Administrative Assistant to the President and his senior staff. When I was not flying, I was in the office, and I handled anything administrative that the crew required. From, like Ruth was saying earlier, that she was personnel, but before we got her on there, I was handling the performance reports, making sure those were graded, done properly. I took care of awards and decorations. I took care of any administrative needs for working with the tuition assistants at the education office for our crew members. They were, honestly, just a side note, they were probably happy to see me go because I pushed education. And I didn't take any excuses from them. I said, this is free. All you got to do is make the effort to go over there, sign your paperwork, and take your classes, and you have plenty of time. And especially the flight attendants, I was constantly on their case about, you come in when we have a mission. And I said, every one of you should have 4-year degrees, or at least a minimum of associate degrees, because you've got the time, because they always give me the excuse, I don't have the time, I don't this. Yes, you do. So, pretty much handled all of the social events for the crew. When we were out on the road, we made sure that, if we had time, check in to where we were going, what's there, and, what can the crew do while we're on the ground, especially if we were there for several days and things. But pretty much handled what the crew needed.
That's interesting. You don't, like, when the president comes to town, sitting on this side, you're like, oh, the traffic he's going to cause.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. But you don't necessarily think about the crew and what they're going to do while he's out campaigning, or
right.
he's out checking in with the base, or, all of these things. So I'm happy to know somebody's taking care of them too.
Yeah, well, when people look at the job, I guess some of them that, you served on Air Force One's glamorous, and it is, and you meet a lot of people, but they don't think about the prep time that goes into that press trip, or some being ready on the base, and at your job 3 hours before the departure of the plane. That doesn't include the time it takes, you're up, getting up and getting ready, and driving the distance. I mean, I live 5 minutes from the base, so it wasn't that bad for me, but we had some crew members that live 40, 50 miles away, and for them to be up there, and we have a 7 o'clock departure, they've got to be in the airplane at 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, this is not counting the driving time for these type things. I don't think a lot of people think about that, and then being at your freshest, best moments, because you've got a different client here than a regular Air Force training mission or a regular Air Force unit or anything like that. This is the President of the United States, and crew members need to be fresh and ready to handle some of the staff who, because they're on the President's staff, jump when I speak. And so it takes a different type of personality to deal with the different personalities that come on board that airplane. Because what happens is when they come on the airplane, we pick up the administrative, communications, security, everything from the White House. It moves from the White House to the airplane for the period of time that he's on that airplane, whether it be 2 weeks, 1 day, 2 hours, doesn't matter.
Wow.
And I wouldn't go back and change it for anything. I remember crew days that run into 30 hours, sometimes 35, 40 hours from the time you pick your head off your pillow to the time you're able to put your head on a pillow again. We've had a few flights like that, but again, I wouldn't change it for anything.
Were you able to work for different presidents?
I probably have the history of being the only one to have served on the presidential air crew under 6 presidents.
Who?
I started with President Nixon, and I retired with President Clinton. So I was there the first time, I left. Went back the second time, I left. Went back the third time, and I said to the colonel when he called me, I said, okay, but this time when I come back, I'm retiring. And that's what I did. And even when I retired, I wasn't ready to retire. I was loving my job. But, the gentleman who was calling me, he called me for 5 months, trying to get me to, come and work with him down there. And I would say, we have to put up with these people every time they fly with us. Why would I want to come to the White House and put up with it every day? I mean, that's kind of what I said to him. So, but I did. I loved my job. I loved working with the folks on Air Force One. You will never, ever find a group of dedicated professional individuals as you do on that crew. And I can go back and say from the early 70s to at least the mid-90s when I retired, they were the best of the best.
Who is your favorite president?
President Bush, 41.
Because he was super nice?
Super nice. He and his entire family, the way that they encompassed the people on his staff, people on the crew, Marine One, they were all his family. It didn't matter who they were. And Mrs. Bush was the same way. It was one big family. The press people, I mean, they looked out for all of them. It didn't matter whether you were Air Force One, Camp David, Marine One, White House staff, BES. It just didn't matter.
Who flew the least?
It's probably hard to say. President Carter flew a lot, and I went through 3 campaigns, and excuse me, I would think that maybe he would have been the one to fly the most. It's hard to say. President Reagan, if you counted, probably you could count on both terms. He would probably have been the less, because we took we'd go to every holiday. We would go to California. Sometimes in the summertime, we'd be there for 3 weeks at a time. While he was up at his ranch. But probably President Carter, or President Reagan. Yeah, President Carter flew a lot during the campaign. Oh my goodness, 13 days prior to election, we were north, south, east, west, back, forth, and I mean, I'd be up till 1:30 in the morning doing speeches. He was doing speeches leg to leg, and we didn't have a computer on the airplane. We had a selector typewriter, and we didn't even have the memory writer for several years after that. And so the president was dictating speeches leg to leg, sitting on the armchair where I was sitting typing. And I would prepare double-spaced drafts for him, pass it on to a speechwriter. He'd go up and get it approved or something and bring it back. Okay, we want to make these changes and things. This was during a campaign.
Wow.
So, and...
thank you for your service.
Well, thank you.
That is just so, whoa, impressive. Okay, so several presidents, several times. What did you do when you weren't on Air Force One?
Assignment-wise?
Yes.
Okay. After the first one, I was in Belgium.
How did you get there? Because you asked?
No, that's when my first husband, General Creighton Abrams, died on active duty. Mm-hmm. His staff had the option to stay in with, was it General Wyand that followed him? Whoever followed him, they had the choice of staying with General Wyand or going to their duty assignment. They could pick their duty assignment provided there was a position there for them. They would not create new positions for them. So when he got that assignment to Belgium, I applied for joint spouse, so I went over with him. And I started out in the SPACO, Special Programs Office for the Chief of Staff. I think it was SPACOS. And I started out there, that was where my assignment was to be. Well, General Alexander Haig had retired, and then I don't know if you know this, they brought him back on active duty to bring him to SHAPE headquarters as SACUR. And I worked with them, and that's when they created a social secretary position, and I worked in that position for a while. And that's where the military aide that I had the confrontation with on the performance report. So I moved from there to when this all happened, they moved me to the National Military Representative's Office and downstairs in MR. And I worked there until we got the assignment back to the States. Went to Langley Air Force Base. We were getting ready to rotate back to the States, and that's when I got the call from Colonel McClellan. They were coming to the crew. The president was coming to Belgium for the G7 summit, I think it was, and he called me and asked me to come and have lunch with the crew. And while I was there, he told me they were adding a second position because President Carter liked to fly a lot more than they were used to. They were adding a second position, and they wanted me to come back to the crew. So I said, talk with your husband. And so by that time, we were pretty much split anyway. So we came back. They took care of all the orders and everything, but before they could get the second position approved, I already had the orders to Langley. So I went to Langley, and I was at Langley for 9 months or 10 months, and I told my boss when I reported in, I said, you need to know that the White House is adding a second position to the Air Force One crew, and they've already told me that it's mine. You got a 3-year control tour here. You're not going anywhere until then. And I said, okay. So I just kind of sit back and watch it happen, and I had the orders came down, and I went in and told him, I said, here's my orders, sir. And I said, I'll be leaving in 2 weeks. And so I went back to the crew. Served on the crew, and then I remarried with my late husband, who passed away in '98. He was on the crew, and I was on the crew.
What did he do on the crew?
He was the chief of communications for the airplane. And when they found out that we were dating, my boss called us both in and said, you can't fly together on the crew, because he had asked me. I said, we're probably going to get married. He said, you can't be on the crew and be married. So we went to, we had our choice of assignments. I went to Barksdale Air Force Base because where my husband wanted to go, there was no position for me they told me there was no position in the administrative career field for a master sergeant, which I was by that time I was a master sergeant.
Which is a
E8.
Okay.
I'm sorry, E7. And so I went to Barksdale. I said, okay, we talked about it, and I said it gives my son a chance to be with his grandparents, around his grandparents, because they only live 70 miles down the road. So we were there, and we went down there, and then my husband went to Grissom in Indiana, and that's where I met Ruth for the first time in '82. And so that's how long we've been friends. And so then I had cross-trained. By this time, I had cross-trained into the paralegal career because I didn't think at all I'd have a chance to go back to the Air Force One crew. So we get my assignment work for Grissom in Indiana, and we're there for 3 years, and then I had made Senior NCO of the Year in the paralegal career field, and I get a call from the TJAG office in Washington, D.C., want to know if I would take an assignment to Washington in the Air Force Legal Services Center. So I went, and I found out that they're putting a master sergeant in a chief's position. So I questioned the general about it. He said, his word to me was, if I didn't think you could handle the job, I wouldn't be putting you there. So I left it at that. Served 2 years. And I had just been moved over to take over the Third Circuit Court of Administration, where we set up all the courts martials and get all the defense attorneys and prosecutors and everything. And sitting there one day, and phone rings, and it's my former boss, Colonel Bob Wright, who was President Reagan's pilot. And his question to me, he says, "Have you decided what you want to do when you grow up?" And I said, because he used to tell me this. We used to joke back and forth about this all the time. So probably not, because I'm not going to grow up. So, and I said, "What's up?" And he said, "Well, got a call from the White House this morning, and when I left the second time, there had been 2 females who had filled the position that I had." And he said, "I got a call from the White House this morning, and one of the young ladies," he called her name, she can't be on another Air Force One mission. I was never told what happened, what the case was or anything. And he said, "I want you to come back." Now, this is the same one who had told me, "You can't be married to each other and both of you be on the crew." So I said, "Okay, when are we talking about?" He said, "Yesterday." I said, "No, sir." I said, "I've got to talk to my general." I said, because he just moved me into a position, and long story short, I got the appointment got on the general's calendar, and I told him what I was there for, and he said, the line numbers were getting ready to be released for chief. And his first was, "What am I going to tell our chief that one of our new chiefs wants to leave?" And so that's how I found out that I made Chief Master Sergeant. So, but anyway, I went back, but I told him, I said, "If I come back this time, when I leave, I'm going to retire." He said, "Well, I'm retiring in 2 years anyway, so you can retire anytime you want to." So, but I went back and finished my last 4 years. But I got to I was at the 26-year mark, and so my boss at that time, Colonel Danny Barr, he said to me, "I don't want to hold you back. If you want to go down there," I said, "Well, I'm really not ready to retire." But he said, "Well, you're coming up on 26 years." And he said, "You're not going to get any additional longevity raises or anything." We talked about it and everything. And so he said, "I think you ought to go down and talk to them, give them an opportunity. Listen to what they have to say, what they're offering in your package." So you probably heard about Travelgate at the White House with the Clintons when I probably shouldn't say this, but anyway, it was when the entire White House travel office was completely, they fired everybody, came in and fired everybody. And the new director who took over, who had been hired to take over, wanted me as his deputy. So that's I finished up with 26 years in March of '94, and went to the White House and was there.
How old was your son when you retired?
Let's see, how would he have been? He was born in '74, April of '74, and I retired in April of '94, so he's 20. 20.
Oh, right.
He just turned 45 this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's long out of your head.
Oh, he was in college, and it didn't matter where I was at. Anytime I was on a mission, I talked to him every day. It did not matter where I was at, out of country. I talked to him on a daily basis.
Did you make Chief Master Sergeant?
I did.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an E8, I take it.
E9.
E9.
Mm-hmm.
So you skipped E8?
No, I was promoted to E8.
Because in '82 you made E7. So when did you make E8?
I made E7 in '83, E8 and I'm not sure, in the '80s sometime I went to the senior academy and I had a line number. I made chief. I don't even know what my dates were in chief.
Well, it was right before you went to the last time, so 4 years before '94, so '90.
Probably sometime around there, because I went to the senior academy. I don't remember, honestly.
Well, because you said that's how you found out you were going to make Chief Master Sergeant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, maybe that was senior. I know.
And then,
honestly,
well, if I'm listening correctly,
yeah.
You said
90.
You had to go tell the general.
Yeah,
he was like, the line numbers.
So that would have been 88. Yeah, 88. Because that's when I went back and I finished my last 6 years on the crew.
Okay.
Yeah, on my last tour was 6 years on the crew, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I think there's one other individual on the crew that served under 5 presidents, but I'm the only one that can say I was on the crew for six presidents. So
you had to be darn good at it. They kept wanting you to come back.
Mm-hmm. It was stressful at times. You know, there was things that went on that happened, and you can't talk about it and everything. You had to remember, and we always had to be nonpartisan because you could have a Democratic president, you could have a Republican president, and you just had to keep those things in mind. Always be professional.
So, you worked in the White House after Travelgate.
Mm-hmm.
Your Air Force One experience had to have been very helpful in that, or?
It did, because when I went down there, I was down on the other side of the road. You know, all those trips that we'd be out there with the president. Now I'm in the office that is sending the advance team out, the medical out, the security and everything, take care of all the logistics, making sure that the advance teams had their tickets, airline tickets where they need to go, provide for where we could send them out and set up buses and any type of transportation that was required by the president, his group, and the aircraft and anything that was needed for the president's trip or his stopover for an hour or a day or 2 days or a week. That's what we did. And there were times that I was handling 170 cities at one time between the president, first lady, vice president, and second lady. That was, and I had my own team that I sent out there as was part of the advanced team and making sure that we had all the information that we needed we handled all the billing and things like that for the press folks. Setting up we'd send people out to set up the press filing centers where the press operated from. Food, brought them in for the meals and things so that they didn't have to leave the buildings. I mean, basically whatever they needed, in the press area for them, and we did all the charter bids, select the aircraft, that was going to go to follow the president, to carry the press on. That was all in the press filings in the White House Travel Office. We had all our accountants, and so they would come back, bring the billing and everything. We probably ran a $15-16 million program.
How many people ran in that office? How many people?
I don't know how many were there before, but when we finally took over and stood the office up, there was, when they'd already hired the director and he had hired an accountant. We had 2 travel agents, and then part of the travel office was the American Express travel center, and of course they took care of all of the air travel, got tickets for the events team, anybody that had to go out to support the trip. Yeah, so yeah, and it was a constant battle over getting the technical support that we needed as far as computers and phones and to get the billing out. It's like, well, why aren't these bills going out? Well, when we took over, we had over 16 or $17 million out that was owed on previous trips that had been taken, had never been billed. So,
how long did you do that job?
For almost 3 years, because, and I would have stayed, but I'll just say this: there were some things that were going on to me that were unethical, and I was not willing to be a part of it. So I said, I'm resigning, or we make these changes. These things have to be done. These are laws which govern taxpayer dollars and things, and I will not be a part of what's going on. And I gave my resignation. They still asked me to stay because my boss had left. They asked me to stay on until they could find another director. I said, I'll stay, but I will not sign any vouchers. My name will not be on any vouchers when it comes to taxpayer dollars.
Thank you for your integrity.
Yeah. I always, and I don't know when it all started or whatever, but I came to believe there's an invisible mirror when you walk out the door. And if you're not happy with what you see in there, there's a problem. And you need to make some changes in your life. And I used to tell my airmen, it didn't matter, never forget where you came from, and always take care of your people. Remember, there's not an I in team.
There's not an I in team.
Oh.
Okay. So, do you do anything now?
Yes. Let's see. After I retired from the Air Force, I went to the travel office, and I left there, and I worked with Civil Air Patrol. I'd been a volunteer with Civil Air Patrol for a number of years before, but then they had a paid position come open, and they asked me to take that. And I worked there, and then went to work with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations.
CSI.
OSI. Mm-hmm.
OSI.
Yes. Ruth was up at the headquarters, and I was in a hideaway place. I was an agent for them doing special cases. So, and then I got a call one day from one of the girls that I flew with, And she says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, working." She said, "You're looking for a new job?" And I said, "No, not really." She says, "Well, I have a job for you." She says, "I've already talked to my supervisor. She wants to meet you for lunch or breakfast." And I said, "Doing what?" She says, "Working for OPM, doing special investigations." Basically what I was doing, you know. And so I went. We met for lunch, and we had a nice lunch. We talked. She asked me a few questions, and we get ready to leave. And she says, "When do you want to start?" And I said, "Well, isn't there paperwork that needs to be completed?" And she says, "You just tell me yes or no, and I'll take care of the paperwork and everything." So I worked for OPM as special investigator for 10 years. And I had a bad car accident in January of 16, broke my neck and my back, and busted my shoulder up and everything. So I told my husband, because I was putting on sometimes 200-300 miles a day travel, and I said, when I come off of workman's comp and get healed up, I'm putting my papers in. So I retired in 30 September 2016. And then I had a neighbor down the street from me. She said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know, anything that I can wear blue jeans. I don't have to have security clearance. I just want to have fun." So I was a compliance officer at Huntington University of Health Sciences in Knoxville from October 1st of 16 until August last year.
Are you finally settling in and sitting down somewhere?
Not really. When we're not at home taking care of renovations at our house, we're on the road traveling somewhere.
Okay, I can live with that.
It's a family, it's a kid thing. He says, "Okay, what part of the country are you in today or this week?" Because we never know. We feel like getting up and one morning and we say, let's take a couple of days and just go here or there. So something within driving distance that we can just go and have a nice lunch, drive home that afternoon, or spend the night. We're maybe 3 hours from Chattanooga, so we'll go down and spend the night at Chattanooga choo-choo train, Just we're getting ready for what's our next trip? St. Thomas.
Ooh.
And every year we go to Louisiana for New Year's, and every May now we go to Texas for Crawfish Festival. So we stay busy.
Okay, that's the kind of busy I like.
Yeah. But right now, I know Ruth mentioned it earlier that. Both of us being on the former Air Force One crew, and in 2016, ever since I retired, I've maintained the former crew roster. Every 3 years, I set up and run the reception for all the former crew, to get all the administrative, everything pertaining to it out and things. So in 2016, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but Hangar 4 at the museum was dedicated, and it's Air Force One. So after that happened, I started getting phone calls. "Hey, it'd be so cool to have a reunion at Dayton, in the hangar." I said, "Do you know how much work is involved in that? I'm now in Tennessee. I'm not in Washington, D.C. I can't run it by myself. It's a lot of work involved in things." So they just kept asking, and then last year at the Sam Fox reunion, which we normally have in conjunction with, it's like bombarded with, "Hey, are we going to do this? Are we going to do this?" And I said, "Well, we're still talking about it and everything." And I talked to Colonel Barr, who was my former boss, and, "Well, I think it's a good idea." He said, "But that's going to be a lot of work." And I said, "Yes, sir, I know." I said, "But I'm telling you right now, you're going to be the MC." And he said, "Well, let me think about it." "No, there's no thinking about it. If we do it, you're going to be the MC." So we kind of went from there. So I called Ruth and I said, "Ruth, what do you think about putting together a reunion in Dayton?" "Well, I'm all for it. That's cool. Let's do it." But I don't know, a couple months ago, I don't know where we were, and we were talking about the roster, so I'm trying to get it correct and current, and find out that, make sure we're not missing anybody. And we kind of looked at each other. Do you think we bit off more than we can chew here, or what? So, but here we are. We have a roster now of 587, and when you look at that number and compare it to the number in the Air Force, I mean, that's 587 maintainers and aircrew who've had the opportunity to step on and work on that airplane. And it's just amazing that we're even at that point right now. 2.5 months ago, where are all these people? But you find out social media, you can do a lot. So we've been working, pretty much around the clock. We made 3 trips up here to Dayton. Wow. But it's been fun. It's going to be successful.
I'm sure it is.
So,
they've got the best worker on the team.
Well, I'd like to think so, but
I'm telling you, they absolutely do. Okay, so are you a part of any other veterans organizations?
I'm active with the American Legion in Clinton, Tennessee. I'm active with the Air Force Sergeants Association at McGee-Tyson in Maryville, Alcoa, Tennessee. That's the closest around to me. And I'm active with the Civil Air Patrol, and that's where we promote young people programs and things and prepare them for the Air Force. They have opportunities to learn to fly when they're 14 years of age, and are active in the cadet programs for the Civil Air Patrol. and my husband knows that if I slow down, I'll stop. So he encourages it.
Okay.
He's there with me as the official photographer on most of the activities that I'm involved with and everything, because he loves it, and he loves the kids working. The fact that we work with the kids and things like this, and especially when I get a phone call inviting me to their graduation from the Naval Hill Academy, West Point, the Air Force Academy. And, it's like, well, are we going to? Of course we're going. You've had these kids since they were 12 years old. So, yes.
That is super groovy. Have you ever done honor flight?
Yes.
You did?
I did. There was myself and one other female that was on the flight, and I did mine in Tennessee, out of Knoxville. And as a matter of fact, this young lady that we were talking to today, that we were talking to about your program, I told her, I said, I've nominated you and another female from Ohio, because you go with the honor flight from the state where you live. I said, we've nominated you and my friend to go on the Air Honor flight from Ohio. So I said, when we get the information, we'll send it to you and you'll get a letter and everything. I said, Rebecca, you cannot believe the reception, not only the send-off, but when you come in. I said, we left from Knoxville, and the departure ceremony that they had, we got to Washington National Airport. I mean, the airport was packed. The terminal where we came into was packed. When we got back home that night, the airport at Knoxville was packed. Flags and flowers. I mean, I couldn't hold all the bouquets that they were handing me, and the balloons and signs and things. And what they do is they contact. Have you been on it?
I'm too young.
Why are you too young? You're a veteran.
Here, our honor flight is for World War II vets, Korea vets, and then they let Vietnam vets go.
Oh, okay.
So,
see, down there, as a matter of fact, I'm going again. They've invited me to go again. They have an all-female veteran flight.
Oh, we don't have that yet.
Yeah. that's one of the
But
things.
I will talk to Al Bailey.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that they're doing. It's all female flight, and so I called Ruth and I said, I think you would enjoy going since it's all female veteran, and so I'm looking forward to it because I had a great time. Have you been in D.C., stationed there, put up with the traffic or anything?
I've been, no, not recently.
Okay. Well, you know how the traffic gets there. Well, we have escorts. The honor flights have escorts. Side streets, they're all blocked. Police are sitting there. Nobody gets through until our caravan. We had 6 buses. It was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
I have been, for honor flight, I've been part of the reception that you guys get off the plane and stuff. Mm-hmm. I go to that part to help support. So.
Well, that's my husband and I go to those now.
Yeah. So that's the part I can do, so I do.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. What lessons have you learned from your military service?
What lessons? Well, I think I said it earlier. Never forget where you came from. Never forget that you wore no stripes, 1 stripe, 2 stripes. And always mentor. Mentoring these young people behind you. The importance of networking. Always giving 100% to your job.
Is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or that should be added to this interview?
I don't think so.
Okay. We're good with all of who you are and the whole body of work that you have created and lived?
Yes.
I think so. I mean, I'm sitting here in amazement over you, but I just want to make sure I didn't miss any really cool parts.
Let me think.
Okay. Any extraordinary military stories or events?
No.
No, we talked about it all? Okay.
I don't know if we talked about it all, but I'm 70 years old. I got a bad memory. No.
I think your memory was great, especially if you're 70. So wonderful. Okay. All right. What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view or hear this interview?
Don't be afraid to step out there and try. If you're not sure what you want to do with your life, you're young, you have a chance to come out and serve our nation, either as a volunteer in the military, any type of public service. Take some time, think about it. A tour in either military branch of the service will give you time to learn a little bit more about yourself. Guaranteed you to be taken care of. You'll get a free education if that's what you'd like to do, but at least you'd have 3 or 4 years to think about it and not waste it. Don't go to college, spend parents' money, party. Go do something that you think you'd like to do.
Yeah. That concludes our interview with Kim Johnson. Thank you for your time today and for your military service.
Thank you for your service.
You're very welcome.